Welcome back. You're listening to Epic Voyages on the Inception Radio Network. I'd just like to handle some, how shall we say, housekeeping before we get to our very special guest, Grant Cameron. And that is that Epic Voyages provides you with up-to-date information and exciting projects. And to view our upcoming radio shows, please check out our links on Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and of course, subscribe to the Epic Voyages YouTube channel. You can hear us every Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, by going to InceptionRadioNetwork.com. IRN provides you, yes, you, with several opportunities to tune in and not miss a beat. This includes listening to us live on your television set by a Roku TV set-top media player. You can download the IRN app on your Android, iPhone, BlackBerry, and Amazon smartphone, or through their syndicated streaming partners like TuneIn, iTunes, and Google Play Music. This show is also available on your car stereo by Stitcher Radio's vehicle dashboard app. Lastly, if your power goes out, you can still listen to us through an old-fashioned tethered phone line by dialing 401-267-8300. That's 401-267-8300. This show is broadcast every Friday night on Dark Matter Digital Network, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. If you can't catch us live, don't worry. You can catch this show by visiting as well as hundreds of other past Epic programs at irnshows.com, where you can download podcasts. We invite you to join our conversation through IRN's interactive chat room at irnchat.com. You can also get your questions and comments to us by Skyping Inception Radio Network or dialing 888-919-2355. That's 888-919-BELL. And going to the chat room, I see we have a couple of questions already coming up. One is from Daria Abedanova, who asks about what knowledge we have of what was Mikhail Gorbachev's views on UFOs. And the first thing that I can come up with is the fact that when President Reagan was trying to initiate de-escalation of the tensions in the United States and the former Soviet Union, he addressed the Mikhail Gorbachev, who was then party chairman of the Soviet Union, and he asked the question, what would happen if the United States and the Soviet Union were threatened by an alien menace, a threatening force, and the whole planet would unite to defend itself from that. And do you have any other information about Gorbachev and UFOs, Grant?
Well, yeah, I went to the Reagan Library a couple of times, and Reagan, in the MEMCONs, the Memorandums of Conversation with Gorbachev, they discussed the subject a couple of times, and Gorbachev, there's an interview on the internet where Gorbachev is actually talking about him and Reagan walking in a garden or something, where Reagan starts talking about this, and Gorbachev's comment is, when he talks about the alien invasion, he said, I think it's premature. I don't disagree with the premise, but I think it's a little premature or something like that. But the one thing that really amazed me when I saw the MEMCONs was that Reagan was talking reincarnation to him, and he believed the whole Star Wars initiative was that Reagan and Gorbachev, according to Reagan, had lived a past life together, and that they were in this lifetime to straighten out nuclear weapons. That this was part of their role in life. It was very interesting to see these in these official documents where Reagan is talking to him about reincarnation.
So perhaps Commander Mitchell did talk to the presidents about consciousness, and maybe Reagan was one of them that received his briefing.
Yeah, that's just fascinating stuff where we aren't just talking lights in the sky. We're actually talking where I think that actually it's all what it's all about, that these guys do know, and it makes sense that they would.
And some experiencers have the shall we say, the knowledge or the experience that the craft are alive. And this is something that also has to do with consciousness, that if an advanced civilization is sufficiently adept, they may be able to create artificial life forms that have consciousness themselves. One experiencer said the craft actually have a soul. And would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, well, that goes to this idea, that my idea of consciousness, that whether it's a particle or whatever it is, everything has consciousness, and that they understand this. We just don't understand this. We think that we're the only ones that have conscious, and we're talking about self-awareness or self-consciousness, where we sort of think, and there's even some people who actually maintain that you don't have consciousness until you learn to speak a language, and it's like, come on, I mean, it's like next thing you're going to say you need a U.S. passport or something. I mean, you make up these things, but in reality, it's basically everything has consciousness, and then things start to really start to fit together. That the ship is alive. I think Denise Stoner, I don't know if you've ever interviewed her, but she's one that talked about being taken below and seeing the power plant of the craft, and that she was absolutely for sure that this thing was alive, that she was actually talking to this thing, and she said she actually felt very, very sorry for it, that it was captive, that it was part of the ship, and that it was communicating with other ships all over the universe. And so you get this kind of stuff, and it's, if you look at the free survey, you get the numbers start to show these. This isn't just one or two experiencers. When it comes to flying the craft, it's 13% of all experiences. The numbers are in the hundreds of people who answered this question, who said that they've actually flown the craft. Which, if you look at, a woman in Saudi Arabia, it's illegal for her to drive a car, but if she gets abducted or taken as an experiencer, I mean, she's allowed to fly the ship, no insurance, no license, nothing. I mean, and so you have to start to question, why are they allowing people to fly the ship? And that's when it comes down to this with this experience with you and Stephen Greer and stuff like this. We're being trained. We are being given this stuff. I was helped in terms of my understanding. Yeah, and I think same with Stephen Greer. The protocols that are used, the CE5 protocol, according to what I know, I mean, he was taught those. He didn't figure this out for himself. And a lot of times as human beings, we sort of think we're rationally figuring this stuff out. And no, we got to realize that we're getting a lot of help along the way, and that they are taking us maybe slowly along a path, but that we've agreed to this. And this is something that we're sort of ahead of the game. And we just have to wait for other people to pick it up. But we already realize the importance of this consciousness aspect.
I'd like to mention my own personal experience with the notion that craft are alive. Now, I'm not an abductee. I'm not a person who believes he's been on board spacecraft, although I have had 2 episodes of missing time, and I've never been under hypnosis. But during one of my series of contact downloads, when I think I may have been in the emergency room. After a long shift, I was resting. I was finished with my tour, and I was just half asleep, half awake, and all of a sudden downloading into my consciousness like an awake dream. And in this revelry, I found myself on board a spacecraft, except it wasn't on board. I was embedded in the literal wall of the craft. And I remember the first thing that struck me, and I could see out into space, and I could see the planet Earth. I said it was cold. I felt how absolutely cold space was. And when I said that, I realized I was in this dream, awake dream, was in communication with the intelligence of the craft. The craft was alive. And it was aware of what was happening around it, just like any other sentient being would. At one point, I sensed a satellite coming very fast in our direction. I remember in my mind's eye seeing it. It was obviously an incapacitated satellite, and the solar array were spinning around these metal spikes with the remnants of solar collectors. It almost looked like a kind of ball and chain spinning around. It was coming in our direction. And I said, watch out, it's coming. And the intelligence behind the craft said, don't worry, we're aware, we're tracking it, that sort of thing. So wow. This, although it was very moving. I couldn't convince myself that I actually had been on board craft, but other contact experiencers, other people in my team, had dreams about being on board spacecraft, and one in particular, Joe Vallejo, he's now a retired 747 pilot from United Airlines. He told me one day that he had woken up and had a dream that he was flying a UFO. And the first thing he said was left seat. In other words, he was the pilot. And that's very important, a left seat. So I think that these telepathic interactions are occurring all over the planet. And it's something that we have to accept and pay attention to, because it might hold out to us the promise of the next evolutionary step of humanity, where we will develop these talents and these methods of communication with the assistance of non-human intelligence. But I can tell you, I don't think they're going to download their secrets of telepathy or the secrets of their zero-point energy, if that's what they're using to fly their craft, unless we have world peace, unless we have social justice around the planet, and to have a sustainable culture that rises above the preoccupation with tribal warfare, which seems to be our main endeavor on this planet. So let's go right back into the DeLong story, because I'm sure the audience is very eager to hear about how this has unfolded and continues to unfold as more and more emails are being made available.
Okay, so Tom DeLong is one of a number. People are sort of giving him sort of credit that he's the guy that's the disclosure guy, but you and I both know that Stephen Greer went down this same route, was contacted by a number of high-level officials. Bill Moore in the 1980s, before Stephen Greer, had what was called the Avery, a bunch of high-level military and government officials who were giving him material. Before him was Robert Emenegger, a film producer from Grey Advertising, who had been given authorization to talk to high-level people inside the American government, was given a bunch of stuff. So this has been going on a long time. Disney, there was a story about Disney being given material and footage and stuff like that, and producing a documentary. So DeLong is only one in a number of people who have gone down this route. And what he's claiming is that he went first to Lockheed Skunk Works. He goes to a guy by the name of Robert Weiss, whose name now appears in the WikiLeaks emails, and he's the head of Lockheed Skunk Works. And like years ago with Ben Rich, he actually talks to Tom DeLong about consciousness. He goes back to the same thing, that consciousness is the key. This is the important thing to talk about. But he goes to Lockheed, and Tom DeLong gives them his pitch, and he says, I've got this media outlet. You guys aren't going to get this message through to kids. If you want this thing to get across, you got to get this message out. And they basically agree. They agree they send him to a guy who I think I know who he is. He's a civilian in Washington, D.C., who then talks to him, and he builds this group of what he says are 10 officials who are giving him material to disclose, almost like Stephen Greer said, where they're giving him material, and he's sort of the disclosure guy. Now, I always maintain that he's not going to get actual classified material because he doesn't have a clearance for classified material, but they are going to manage him. They are going to give him some material. They want this message out, and whether it's Stephen Greer or whether it's Tom DeLong or whether it's Bill Moore, these people are sort of like useful people who can help get this message out to whatever the audience is that they want. And one of the 10 people, according to Tom DeLong, as he tells the story, is John Podesta. And it's a very interesting story because today there was, I'm not sure, I think it was 5,000 emails released today from John Podesta's files. We'll see tomorrow because the election is tomorrow, and I believe that these things are being leaked to hurt Hillary Clinton. So I'm not sure there's going to be any more emails after today. But as of today, you have these emails that are missing a couple. And the significant ones that they're missing are related to a story that Tom DeLong tells about how he met John Podesta. So he has maybe 9 of these high-level officials. He goes to John Podesta and he gives him his speech. I'm this rock star. I've got this Twitter account. I've got this Facebook. I've got this, records, and all these kids are following me. And I can get this message across to young people. You guys are messing it up. You need me to do this. And he says, he's talking to John Podesta, and John's just sitting there listening on the phone. And he gets to the end, and John doesn't say anything. And then John says, well, I'm kind of busy, so give me a call back in a couple of months. And Tom DeLonge figures, well, that was a waste of time. I mean, he's evidently had no interest in what I was saying, thinks I'm some crazy rock guy or whatever. So he hangs up the phone, and he has no intention of phoning John Podesta back. And then he says, a couple of months later, and to quote him, a flurry of emails end up in my box. Now, these emails have not been released. These would be very, very significant emails if they get released. And they were from June or July of 2015. So they are in the time frame where these emails are being released. Now, what has happened to these emails, I'm not sure whether they're still going to be released or whether they've been pulled or what happened. But he said a flurry of emails came into my box. And basically what he's saying to John Podesta is, I'm the disclosure guy. I've got this plan to disclose to the American people, and I want you on my team. And John says, phone me back in a couple months. I'm kind of busy. But when these flurry of emails, John contacts him and he says, okay, I'm ready to participate, or however, I can't remember exactly how the phrasing was. I'm ready to participate in this thing. This is of tremendous significance. This is very important. I need you to come to Washington. Now, that's in an email. That's extremely significant, because there is no doubt what Tom DeLonge is doing. It's not like he's trying to sell records or anything. There's no doubt this is disclosure. This is Tom DeLonge saying this is for real. There's a high-level bunch of people who are back engineering this stuff. ETs are real. Flying saucers are real. It's all for real. And John Podesta has agreed to play. Now, my interpretation of what had happened was, John is a government guy. He's not going to jump at things. He's not going to say things out of place. So when he gets the pitch, he says, okay, call me back in a couple of months. John would then, I think, go to the people in power and say, who's this Tom DeLonge guy? Who's dealing with him? He says there's 9 people dealing with him. Who's dealing with him? What are they telling him? Is there something I can do in this sort of thing? And he gets an authorization to deal with Tom DeLonge. So he goes back to Tom DeLonge, and this is where the emails begin, where you'll see in the WikiLeaks emails, these emails going mostly from Tom DeLonge to John Podesta starting in the middle of 2015. And there are some extremely significant emails that take place. One is the questions that take place. Tom DeLonge goes and he's doing a documentary called Secret Machines. And this is in the middle of 2015. And he goes and he actually interviews John Podesta. And there's a trailer that's out on the internet which has John Podesta having a couple of little pieces from that interview in a sort of a little teaser type thing. And he says, it's a $600 billion budget. There's a lot of stuff that we really don't know what's going on. There are these programs that happen deep inside the Pentagon, and there's not much light that gets in there. And so he does this interview. And the interesting thing is when you see the email to John Podesta with the questions, it's basically the ultimate questions. It's one comes from a book called At the Stroke of a Pen, which is written by a professor at the University of Wisconsin, who talks about this executive order, which I say is one of the 5 reasons that the president has to be running the cover-up. This whole idea that people think that secrecy is run by laws, and it's not run by laws. All secrecy, whether it's UFO secrecy or any other kind of secrecy, and all classification, UFO secrecy or otherwise, is run by executive order, which means it's run out of the executive office of the president. There is no side group that makes secrecy except for atomic energy, which is done by Congress. But other than that, all secrecy and all classification comes out of the president's office. So the one question that Tom DeLonge is asking is this ultimate question. This professor says that the president has this ultimate authority over secrecy. And is this true? Does the president have, and if this is true, what can the president do to minimize the amount of secrecy that surrounds the UFO subject? And then, of course, the questions, is there a cover-up? And these are the questions that are asked. And what you see very interesting is that John Podesta never forwards these emails to anybody except when he gets these questions. Then he starts forwarding these emails to 3 people inside the Center for American Progress. And one guy is a guy on transparency. One guy's expertise is, and they all seem to relate to these questions, where John is going to these people and getting input. How do I answer these questions? What's the input that you can give me to answer them accurately or to avoid stuff? So and then 2 of the people are inside the Hillary Clinton campaign, where he forwards these questions that Tom DeLonge is going to ask in this interview. And that's a significant one. And then, of course, you go from that's the middle of 2015, and then you go to the ultimate email, which a lot of people have probably heard about. And this is the email that takes place on January 25th, 2016. Tom DeLonge sends an email to John Podesta, and he says, I've got this group, and I want you to meet some of my team. So he gets these people to come into a Google Hangout. And the one email is from John's assistant, this Aaron Sepp, who sends the email out and has all the email addresses of the people that are in this Google Hangout. One is John Podesta, one is Tom DeLonge, and one is this General William Neil McCaslin, who is a Major General and who used to run the lab at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where, according to what he told Tom DeLonge, is where the Roswell crash material was kept. And he ran this lab, I think, from 2011 till 2013. And McCaslin, according to the emails, is contacting John Podesta, and he's saying, is the time you're giving me Eastern time, or is it translated to Mountain time for me? So he's coming. He's coming to the meeting. Some people maintain, well, maybe he didn't come to the meeting, but yes, he did. Then you have the second guy is a general. His name escapes me, but he's a general who was...
You talk about Carey?
Carey, yeah. And he's the assistant of the U.S. Air Force Space Command in Colorado, outside of the NORAD headquarters there. So he's invited to the meeting, and there's a contact with him that shows that he's coming as well. And then you have...
Weiss is also invited. The head
Weiss
of
is invited. Yeah, and that's significant, because I always say this is kind of ironic, because I was writing articles on John Podesta when he was still back in the Clinton White House. And one of the stories was in, I think it was a Las Vegas newspaper, where John talks about the fact that whenever X-Files came on, it didn't matter what was going on in the White House. I went home to watch X-Files because he was just fascinated with X-Files. And he said he actually, at one point, phoned Area 51 to find out what was going on, because he was so fascinated with the subject. And now you have this situation where a month after this meeting, this Robert Weiss writes an email, and John Podesta, or Tom DeLonge, sends this email to John Podesta, and it says, Robert Weiss has just contacted me, and he would like to know if there's any follow-up. So whatever happened in that January the 25th meeting, this Google Hangout with these high-level guys on a meeting with UFO disclosures, there's no doubt this is what the meeting was about. Weiss is now asking DeLonge, is there a follow-up, which tends to indicate that John Podesta had agreed to do something or look up something or find something, and Weiss is coming back and saying, is there a follow-up? What is John saying? What's happening? And I say that's kind of ironic, because in the 1990s, Tom Podesta was phoning Area 51. Now Area 51 is phoning John Podesta to find out what's going on. And it was just so weird. And that was very dramatic. Now, these guys were all contacted by, I'm sure, a lot of reporters. I know Billy Cox made a contact. He did the blog. He's been doing a blog for 30 years. In fact, he wrote an article on the Reagan alien invasion in the 1980s with using my material. So he's been writing UFO material since the 1980s, and he's now no longer a reporter. But he said, just for the hell of it, I contacted them all at Podesta, all these high-level, these 2 generals and the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, and none of them replied. So they're running for cover, but you're in a situation where sooner or later, one of these guys is going to face a question from a reporter about what happened in this meeting, and is this true? Are you guys on this program to declassify? And one of Tom DeLonge's emails before this Google Hangout in the late 2015, actually has a, you may have it, I don't have it in front of me, but he actually quotes my main guy, who is McCaslin from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He has some suggestions for the memo that should go out from the White House. And basically, here's this general, and he quotes him, and it's a long dissertation by this general about what to do when they do the disclosure email. And basically he says, you've got to get all the agencies together, like science, technology, all these different things, and have it come from all these different agencies at the same time, link them together, not just from one agency. And he says NASA has to run this thing, because if you don't have, and NASA, he said, would be the agency, he called it their job jar. This is in their job jar. So they should be put in charge of this, because if you don't put an agency in charge of this disclosure sort of announcement, it's just going to fall through the cracks and nothing will get done. So it's just dramatic that you have this major general in the U.S. Air Force who ran this big lab is actually writing this memo secondhand that describes what the White House should do when they make the disclosure announcement.
I'd like to also mention, we talked briefly about Weiss, head of Skunk Works, and one of the things that Tom DeLonge mentions is that he was taken into, I think the term is SCIF. It's a highly secure black operation that's heavily guarded, and I think Tom talks about going through multiple doors with guards with machine guns to actually get into this very secure location where the head of Skunk Works is talking to him about the importance of consciousness. Think about this. This is the most highly secret research facility in the United States. Skunk Works developed the U-2, the SR-71 Blackbird, all kinds of stealth technology. And you have now evidence showing that the head of this lab is going to and working with a UFO.
Don't miss a great offer on an incredibly fast Fios triple play. Click the banner to get 150 meg internet, TV, and phone for only $79.99 per month for the first year. Plus, you'll get a $150 Visa prepaid card with a 2-year agreement. It's your last chance to get this amazing offer before it's gone.
Promoter and experiencer as well, because Tom DeLonge describes in one of the articles, he's actually had an encounter while he was camping. And he makes some reference to somebody he doesn't mention, but clearly from the description of the individual, it's Stephen Greer. So it looks like Stephen Greer may have talked to Tom DeLonge about the protocols, and Tom DeLonge may have practiced them and subsequently had a contact experience. And so I think this is very, very important. People within the UFO subculture aren't just spinning their wheels talking to themselves, that in the past, as well as now, excitingly, right now, are having direct communication with some of the most powerful players in the UFO cover-up. This is very significant.
And especially when you talk to the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, because that's the Ben Rich thing. Ben Rich saying, what do you know about ESP? That this has always been rumored to be the aerospace company that's doing the back engineering of the flying saucer technology. So this would be the main guy. I mean, forget about guy at Wright-Patterson or any place else. This is the main guy you want to talk to, as if there is this technology. And it's not just that they talked about consciousness, because Tom DeLonge actually he has a very bizarre theory. I'm going to actually write a paper to counter his theory, because I really don't want him dumping this thing into a vacuum. And his theory is that the aliens, the UFOs are bad news. That this is the military is there saving us from these evil aliens, and they're all heroes, and it's a complete theory that he developed. He calls it the cargo cult theory. I think it's sort of based partly on.
Where did you find that information? Because I was looking it up on the internet, couldn't find it. Where is this printed?
It's his interview with Jimmy Church. If you like, it's on YouTube. It's a 2.5-hour interview where he talks about this thing, and basically it's basically based on the Jacques Vallée, who's actually doing the intro, or he's listed as an author on Tom DeLonge's next book. And this is this idea, that the phenomena changes as you go through history. It used to be, fairies and stuff like this, and then it changes, and it keeps changing all the time. And so I don't disagree with that. But when he comes to this idea of the evil aliens, he brings it up, and he says they say, okay, you meet this guy in Washington, and he's about to leave this high security area, and they say, "Where are you going?" And he said, "Well, what else? What else you got?" And he says, "Well, consciousness." And that's when either Weiss or these two other guys in the room say, "Now you're talking." And it's not only consciousness, this is what it's about. And they spend 45 minutes talking about consciousness. So Tom DeLonge has these two bizarre ideas. He has this bizarre idea that aliens are bad news and that religions are formed by seeing UFO sightings, and all the religions are fighting. That's how people all get killed, which is total nonsense, because the vast majority of the genocides in the 20th century had nothing to do with religion. I mean, it was China, it was Russia, and none of that stuff had to do with religion. So he's sort of off base. And what's significant about that is you have them not turning him around. They're not saying, "You're wrong on this." They let him go along with his theory. And when you get Stephen Greer, who's saying exactly the opposite, they let him think what he wants to think. They don't try to change Stephen Greer. So you have Stephen Greer's talking to high-level officials, and the aliens are good guys, and the government is the bad guys. And you get Tom DeLonge, who seems to be talking to the same sort of high-level officials, and he's saying the ETs are bad and the government's the good guys, and they're not hiding it from you and I. It's just a bizarre theory. They're not hiding the cover-up from you and I. They're hiding it from the aliens, so the aliens don't know what we're doing to fight back. And it's like, give your head a shake. I mean, the aliens are like 100,000 years ahead of us. They know every move you're making. I mean, there's no way you're going to hide this from the aliens. So he has this bizarre theory. But
how could a totally telepathic culture be expected to not be being able to penetrate any secret that we have? We're talking about a civilization or civilizations that aren't just 100 years or 1,000 years.
Yeah.
We're talking about the fact that if intelligent life exists in the universe other than us, if we are intelligent, that some of these cultures may be tens or even hundreds of millions of years old.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
So, the idea that we're going to fight them in a war, again, is absurd. Nevertheless, I think it's reasonable to be concerned that if people are not properly prepared for disclosure, it could be used to incite people's fears, and this could lead to a spending spree for space-based weapons that would make the current defense expenditures of hundreds of billions of dollars look like chump change. So it's very important for us to recognize that the role of consciousness dictates, the importance of consciousness here dictates that these civilizations are going to be peaceful. And this is a hard sell on a planet that is driven by conflict.
Exactly.
Ridden by conflict.
And yet, when you hear Tom DeLonge talk about consciousness, he's right on the mark. I mean, he's talking like you and I about the fact that there's this one consciousness and everything's plugged into the one consciousness. And yet he has this, it's just kind of just bizarre. And as you say, it's a very dangerous thing. If this thing gets dropped into a vacuum where suddenly there's a disclosure, and this is the theory that comes with it, I mean, it's sort of the evil Skittles argument. You can even say, okay, only 3% of them are evil, but you're still going to try to shoot everything down because it might be the 3% that are evil. And to me, it's just a scary sort of thing. I'm more in line with Stephen Greer, where there's absolutely no way you can be that advanced, because the whole concept behind the UFOs is this consciousness, and it's the oneness. It's this idea that that's how they get here. They understand everything's connected, everything's one, and that's how they move through time and space. So if you have the concept of oneness, and you realize that what you do to your neighbor and you do to yourself, that everything is connected, almost like sort of the mystical experience or the psychedelic experience where people suddenly realize this kind of thing, where this is, to me, is one of the key aspects of the message of the aliens. So if you're going to get this thing where it's us versus them, it goes back to this, almost like this false flag thing where von Braun said this would be the final play. Is first you'd say it was terrorism that to keep the military going, and then it's going to be the alien invasion thing. And so to me, I'm determined I'm going to write this article to present the positive aspect of the ET thing. So this doesn't get dropped into a vacuum where people are sort of, disclosure happens and then people are looking for a theory, and the only theory that's floating around is Tom DeLonge's idea that religions are caused by
evil aliens.
evil aliens, and that the aliens are going to let. It's even bizarre. Like all these weapons are given to these different religions, and they all fight with each other, and the aliens will deal with the people who survive. And I mean, it's like, come on, give your head a shake. I mean, like, but they don't try to change him, which is interesting. The same as they don't try to change Stephen Greer.
Yeah, this point of view that you're putting forward, this analysis, is very helpful for me personally, because one of the problems I had with working in CSETI is that, I came out of the peace and social justice movement. So the people who were helping Dr. Greer were very deep into the military-industrial complex. One of the individuals, John Peterson, I think he was up for being Undersecretary of the Navy. He was passed over, but he was a naval aviator, and he's also head of the Arlington Institute, and it's a think tank that has many contracts with the government. And it was so bizarre to see someone with his credentials going to a meeting as part of Stephen Greer's group. They were working directly together, and he was talking about his experiences as a naval aviator flying off a carrier in the Bay of Tonkin during the Vietnam War. And then you've got people like myself who, when he was doing that work, were out in the streets saying this war is totally wrong. It's killing unnecessary thousands of Americans and millions of people into China. And so you had this weird coalition of people who are contactees or peace and social justice types like myself, who in the course of joining CSETI became a contactee, working with people who were the nuts and bolts of the military-industrial complex that we saw as being pernicious. Another example would be Will Miller, who was a briefing officer, I was told, for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was part of the Eastern Command. He reportedly met with Dr. Greer in 1991, way back in the beginning of the organization, and offered to assist Stephen Greer. And he was there every step of the way, facilitating a meeting for Stephen Greer in the fall of 1993 at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I'm not sure he set up the meeting with Woolsey, who was CIA director, but in December of 1993, with John Peterson's assistance, Dr. Greer, met with the CIA director. I mean, this is absolutely incredible. Why would a small town country doctor who's a contactee get such incredible access? And from these military-industrial types who common sense would dictate that they wouldn't want to have anything to do with that. So, as you point out, they're willing to work with people who have a downbeat view of contact, like DeLong, evil aliens, and setting up religions that fight among each other. And then you have a contactee like Stephen Greer, who's promoting communication and trying to build a sustainable relationship. It doesn't matter, as long as you can work with these insiders and get information out that this is real, they're willing to go along with your particular point of view. That's a very important understanding, which reminds me of when I was working as a detox doc. Sometimes we'd have to detoxify heroin addicts who live on the street, and they lie all the time. In fact, they will lie even if it's going to hurt them, because I learned from the heroin addicts that the only time you can ever believe anything they say is when they say, I want more drugs. And when it comes to the military-industrial types, I'm talking about case officers who work the UFO subculture, intelligence people like, the ones we're talking about. The only time you can ever believe them for sure, they're telling you the truth, is when they say, we want your cooperation. Yeah. And so they'll go with you if you believe aliens are good or bad, as long as you're serving to get this information out to the public in one form or another.
Yeah, it's better to have you on their side where you think that they're your friends and you can be managed to achieve something, rather than having be fighting with them. And it's almost like you have somebody in each newspaper agency and stuff like that. You just want control. You want to be able to pull the string if something gets out of control and move it. And so you have these. It's just bizarre how this is happening, and I don't think they really anticipated, because the WikiLeaks, I sort of looked at it as this is like almost like the UFO that crashes in New York City. I mean, because they tried to shut down Julian Assange by cutting off his internet access at the embassy in the UK. But he had these documents elsewhere, so they continued to leak, and it was like this is like something that they couldn't stop. They couldn't control this kind of thing.
Well, let's look into the future now, because my sense is that from the very beginning, this was a high-risk, low-probability endeavor of moving to disclosure. My perspective on this picture is that it's going to unfold not over the course of a presidential election, decades, years, but generations. My sense is that this is a very, very hard nut to crack, because if UFOs are real and if space aliens or interdimensional beings are real, it fundamentally threatens all terrestrial power. We've talked about zero-point energy. Clearly, these UFOs are not flying on fossil fuels. And if we can achieve some kind of world peace, and this technology can be downloaded safely into our culture, technological culture, then we're going to put out of business the largest industry on the planet, petroleum. And if you're a politician, and oneness is the theme that's going to be necessary to have an open relationship with the aliens, we're talking about one planet, one people.
That's right.
We're talking about ending politics as usual and moving on to some kind of cooperative world government. I'm not talking about a cabal or an antichrist or whatever other conspiracy theory, but a willing association of nations that join together to solve the fundamental problems we face, because we can't, as nation states, solve global warming, overpopulation, or the plagues that are ravaging the country, whether it be AIDS, Zika, or any of the other illnesses that physicians are combating. So if you're a politician who's dependent on promoting fear and division as a way of getting elected, just look at this current campaign cycle. Well, guess what happens if we have world peace and world cooperation as the ticket to get access to ET technology? You are, as a politician, are out of a job. And given the politicians we have now, maybe that's a good thing, yeah? And if you're a member of a fundamentalist Christian group or a jihadist who's willing to blow himself up in order to destroy his enemies who he believes are in league with Satan, what's going to happen if aliens show up and you're convinced they are Antichrist or are demons? This is something that's fundamentally threatening to very, very primitive ideas that are held, unfortunately, among the religious community. And then you have, finally you have the scientists who all their career have been in a state of denial. They've ridiculed this subject, and they believe that we are the only source of intelligent life in the universe. They're going to be made a laughingstock, and they're going to go through some major soul-searching. Oh, I left out the military. Sure. This issue threatens the military of all nations, because if the aliens are so advanced as they appear to be and can fly circles around our Top Gun military jet aircraft, how can you possibly justify the tremendous amount of money that's spent on military if they cannot secure our airspace? If the military is impotent to play any role in stopping these so-called aliens from appearing over our cities, our nuclear power plants, over our missile bases, you will be shown to be impotent. And really, all these defense expenditures could be perceived of as an incredible waste of money to buy junk that doesn't work to secure our airspace. So there are many reasons why various aspects of the elite, and you've written a very good paper, 65 reasons why the government doesn't want to disclose. But what is different about this? What makes you hopeful that this, even now that it's been exposed, what makes you hopeful that this is going to actually possibly go forward if Hillary Clinton wins in the election tomorrow?
Yeah, well, I agree with you. No matter how it's done, at some point, the minute they say ETs are here, I mean, it all explodes, because you can talk about, like Bill Clinton and a number of others have talked about believing there's life out there, that there's microbes on Mars or whatever. That's not threatening, but that they're here. Hillary actually did go there during the one interview where she was talking to Damon Steer in
This is very important. I'm so
December.
glad you're bringing this up. This is very important. Go ahead.
Yeah, where she's the first high-level official that actually said they may already be here. I don't know, but she hints this, like they may already be here, and that's a big change, because that's the basic scientific paradigm that all falls apart, is you cannot get here from there. We're believing in the physical world. It's not a conscious world, it's a physical world, and therefore there's not enough energy in the universe to go past the speed of light and all that nonsense, and they can't get here. It's impossible. So when they suddenly come here, then everything starts to fall apart. What I do know, based upon the people that I would say there's probably, not sure, but 20 to 30 people who are involved in this thing. Like Tom DeLonge mentions Steven Spielberg. He mentions these 10 guys. I know some people who are members of a sort of a third group. What I have been told, what I completely contrary to my idea, that if I were to give you the briefing, the 64 or 65 reasons, you would do the same thing everybody else is doing, because the president, I don't want to deal with this. I mean, it's going to blow up in my face. There's so many things that can go wrong, that what I'm told is for sure they're not experimenting. Both Tom DeLonge and somebody outside Tom DeLonge's camp are both saying the same thing. They know what they're doing. There is a plan that's in action. What I'm told is watch for January, I guess implying something to do with Hillary being elected or something. And I was told it may not be full disclosure, but it's going to be big. Same thing Tom DeLonge is talking about. It's bigger now. After the leak took place, the whole thing is taken off. You figured it would all everybody would run for cover. And I know Tom DeLonge is saying it's bigger than it was before. And I have a source outside Tom DeLonge who's also involved. Tom DeLonge's been in contact with him, and he's in contact with a bunch of high-level officials. And I would trust him with my life. Now, whether he's being used or whatever, but he's saying it's bigger than it was before. This is going to be massive, whatever this is.
But let's think about this, because it's not likely that any president is going to come out de novo and say, yeah, Roswell's real. We've been back engineering for the last 70 years. More likely, they will start with a declassification of cases that have been held confidential or top secret, and the information will be brought out gradually. Is this your impression too, that it's not going to be a bolt out of the blue? It's going to be a stepwise fashion.
That's always the way I thought they had to do it, but it always comes to that point where no matter how gradually you do it, because they've been doing it since almost day one, they've been doing it, but at some point you sort of
back channel. They've done it by by making fools out of Linda Moulton Howe, telling her they're going to give her information, and she's getting ready to do a documentary, and then in the last second, like with Emma Nager, they yanked the plug, and the information they provided was not there.
Yeah, but at some point they're going to spill the milk, and that's when they say ETs are here, and that's when everything changes. And at some point, no matter how gradually you do it, at some point you have to do that. And
why can't it go on like this for a decade again?
Oh, sure, it could. Sure, but eventually you still have to do it. It still doesn't stop that eventual moment when everything's going to sort of blow up. When you have to say they're here.
The reason why is that the UFOs are not going away. We've talked exclusively about the attempts by insiders to move this issue forward. What about the so-called aliens? They're not going to bug off. They're going to keep showing up, going to keep interacting with experiencers. I'm in communication with the CE5 people from a Peruvian network called Rama. All their top people have memories of going on board craft. Whether they actually did that or whether it was a kind of theater of the mind, I can't say. But these interactions are going on, and perhaps they're even escalating. So one thing the government can control is what these so-called aliens are going to do. And if their behavior matches what they've been doing, is that, as you have said quite accurately, I believe. It's as if the aliens are playing or turning pages from a playbook. They have a plan. They are interacting with us in a very specific way, making more and more people aware of their presence. 10% of the planet's population have had a UFO sighting. What happens if it goes to 20%? What happens if it goes to 30%? UFO intelligence has the capacity to put visual displays, or you can say alien craft. I happen to believe that much of what we call UFOs are holographic type. But in any case, the government cannot control the so-called aliens. My impression is that these aliens, this otherness that we call ET, is here to assist us, and they are interacting with increasing numbers of people. Remember, 10% of the population has had a sighting.
Although I think they're using the same technique as the government. They're using this gradual thing, because if the aliens wanted to disclose, they could land on the White House lawn and let everybody know what's going on. They're not doing that. They're coming.
It would be the last thing they ever did, because they'd be blown to bits.
Yeah, and it's like invasion. I mean, it's an obvious invasion if you land on the White House lawn, and that's the way it would be seen. But they're going like if you've ever interviewed Sherry Wild, she gets this impression where she's showing the destruction of the United States, and she's an 8-year-old child. And she says, "Why don't you go to the president? Why are you telling me about this?" And the answer she got from this being was, "It all starts with one." And that's what it seems to be. They're working through Stephen Greer, who expands, and working through you, and you expand. And they're coming from the bottom up, where this growing acknowledgement, where it's become more and more evident every day that these people are probably going to be right. There's probably something going on. They're not all crazy. And 40, 50 years ago, a lot of the stuff we talk about now, you would never talk about 50 years ago. I mean, about actual beings and about telepathy and stuff like that. It was just simple lights in the sky type stuff. So there's this gradual training where it's almost like they've been through it 1,000 times. They know exactly how to do this, because no matter whether it's our civilization or somebody else's civilization, you're going to destroy this civilization if you don't do it properly.
Yeah, you're talking about experience with other cultures. One of my contact downloads involved interacting with what looked like an ET being, and she showed me visual displays in my mind's eye of her people, traveling across a deep space to get here. Yeah. I don't actually believe that they did that. I think this intelligence was co-creating with me a contact experience. But one of the things this individual said to me is, you humans, you think you're so special. Don't you think we've been this way with others before? Other solar systems, almost like a coy mistress. You think you're so special. Well, I've had other boyfriends too. It was very entertaining, and from my point of view, this otherness that experiencers now call ET may be interdimensional, or may be some kind of spiritual energy that we call God. We have such limitations in terms of our understanding of not only the physical world, but also the spiritual world, that we better be prepared to do a lot of learning and be open to the possibility that we can live in peace with this intelligence, and we can grow and prosper. I guess long life and prosper. What was the Vulcan expression? Fingers spread wide apart. Long life and prosper. Yeah. So I think we're getting to the end of our show. We have 2 minutes more. I want to thank you so very much, Grant, for talking to us about the role of consciousness in the context of the flurry of emails that are coming out from the hacked email server of Podesta. And would you please mention that PowerPoint YouTube presentation, because unfortunately tonight we could not show the actual documents, and you do that so very well. Tell the audience how they can get in touch with your blog, and how you can get in touch, how they can tune into that YouTube video.
I really don't know how they. You just go to WikiLeaks emails on video, and it'll probably pop up on a Google search. And my website, the blog is White House UFO at blogspot.com, and that has, I sort of update as much as I can all the stuff that's happening day by day. Whether there'll be anything tomorrow or not, we'll see whether it stops tonight. But it's been going on the entire month, and there's about 100 emails in total that have been released.
Well, that's quite a. I think it was.
ETs.
That's up from last week. I think it was 66 about a week ago. So there's a whole bunch of stuff coming out.
Well, there's UFO, and then there's the Mitchell emails, and then there's the DeLong emails, and then there's X-File emails. There'd be about 100 in total.
Wow. Okay, so this is the end of our show. I want to thank Grant Cameron for his excellent analysis. Also, Ken Jerry, who's given me the opportunity to be a guest host on this program, and for all the other people from the Inception Radio Network. My name is Dr. Joseph Burkes. Next week, that's going to be on the 14th, we're going to have co-founder of the Foundation for Research into Extra-Terrestrial Encounters, Mr. Ray Hernandez speaking. So tune in, and we'll be seeing you again in 1 week's time. Thank you so much, and good night.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Please join us again next Monday evening for Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council's Epic Voyages. I'm Roger Peacock for Epic. Until next time.
You say too much to learn. You say cover up is fine. That's your plan, not mine. I'm ready to